get to Brisbane, to Luke McGrath, who's a Brisbane resident, former Melbourne boy, who's standing on Kangaroo Cliffs, observing the Brisbane River at its peak. Luke, good morning to you.
Good morning.
How far below you at Kangaroo Cliffs is the Brisbane River normally?
Well, the cliffs I don't know if you know the cliffs. They're quite high on the opposite side of the city. They're probably 30 metres high. But the river itself, you can see there's usually walkways and there's rotundas and city ferry sites. They're all gone. So if you can picture, being a Melbourne lad, if you can picture the Yarra, all those walkways along the side of the Yarra, all gone. And then what you've got along most of the Yarra, you've got the walkway and then you've got some grass and the roads. Well, this would be up on the roads in Melbourne along there. So it's just phenomenal. It's a raging bull.
You were at the same point yesterday morning. How much has it changed?
Yeah, a fair bit actually. It's probably up about an hour ago. It was up at least a metre higher than it was at high tide last night. So you've got some really good markers, but the debris is probably doing more damage now coming down the river. About 10 minutes ago, there was a police ferry, tugboat, trying to get up the river. And you see its motors are on full tilt, and it really wasn't going anywhere in a hurry. So it's got some current to it, really does, and it's just taking everything in its path.
What sort of stuff are we seeing floating past? There's television pictures here of a floating footpath being manipulated by tugs, but what else is there?
Oh, there's been everything. Yesterday they had a tanker, part of a tanker coming down, a lot of wheelie bins, garbage bins, industrial bins, bits of boats. I think every pontoon from here to Ipswich has been ripped off its moorings and has been floating past. Just a lot of trees and a lot of debris just keeps coming. And apparently there's a lot of stuff just under the surface that you can't see because obviously it's we've got the equivalent of the Yarra. It's the dirt brown.
And tell us, Luke, how does it interfere with your day-to-day workings? Are you still able to catch some public transport? You're still able to get to work?
No, the buses stopped yesterday, and I mean, it's quite eerie. It's like a war zone. I've got friends who live just on the outskirts of the other side of the city, and all they could hear last night was the fire alarms going, the evacuation alarms. So all the basement car parks are all completely flooded. The city was evacuated, I think, 2 days ago at lunchtime. So, I mean, I've never, ever heard of a capital city in Australia being evacuated. On the outskirts of the city, we're at Kangaroo Point, New Farm, a lot of the areas, low-lying areas through there have all been evacuated. And I don't know what people are doing. A lot of those areas are full of boutique hotels where you've got people from overseas and interstate. I don't know where they all ended up last night, but as the river high tide came through, sorry, I've got the Channel 7 helicopter coming out of the top now.
Oh, that's our mate Peter Doherty. We asked him to keep an eye out for you.
Oh, there you go. Hey, g'day. The worst thing about last night, and it's hard to imagine from the television coverage, is, I mean, right now it's quite ironic. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful day. It's fine and sunny. It's probably 25, 26 degrees already, and it's absolutely immaculate. But the problem with the high tide was it was flooding from within, so the sewage system and the stormwater drains were full. So it was coming up through those systems. And if we had any more deluge yesterday or today, even the high-lying areas would have gone under.
You've moved to Brisbane. In the normal course of events, what's the best thing about living in Brisbane compared with Melbourne?
I was going to say the weather. Yeah, the weather. I mean, it's just fantastic, and it's such a growing city. I moved up here 10 or 11 years ago now, and there's a great story I tell, and I was getting a coffee on Queen Street Mall with a mate from Melbourne 10 years ago. I asked for a latte, and the lady looked at me and said, "Love, we got white coffee and we got black coffee." Things have changed a bit since then. The latte set have moved in. I think it's because people move into Melbourne for the weather, from Melbourne for the weather here as well. But it's one thing this has done that's really, you hear about disasters like this all the time doing. It's brought the community together. And as walking up the cliffs this morning, everyone's saying, "G'day, how are you?" People giving each other cuddles, that are neighbours that they barely, nod to as they rush off to work in the morning. So it puts everyone on a level playing field.
You and I have been watching the footage of the debris and garbage floating out of the Brisbane River, and in particular that enormous pontoon the length of a football field being guided out by tugs. You and I want to know where it will all end up. Professor Andrew Short is Director of the Coastal Studies Unit at the University of Sydney. Professor, good morning. Thanks for your time.
Good morning, Ross and John.
What happens when this gets out into Moreton Bay? Where will it go from there?
Well, normally the river would be discharging all flotsam and jetsam, trees and vegetation and so on. And as you saw today, in the case of the Brisbane River, it's picking up boats and floating restaurants, the whole works, including that big piece of concrete. It'll go out into the bay. Now, once it enters the bay, the velocity of the river will decrease considerably. So you'll get a big, body of debris lying off the mouth of the Brisbane River. Now, what happens to it then depends on weather conditions during the day. If there's calm conditions, it'll continue to float with the currents, the river and tidal currents. If there's an onshore wind, it'll be washed back towards the coast and deposited on the adjoining coastline either side of the river mouth. So it's really up to what happens with the weather over the next day or two as to where a lot of that debris ends up.
See, Moreton Bay is actually enclosed by Stradbroke Island, North Stradbroke Island and Moreton Island. So is it unlikely that it would get out into the ocean?
Well, those large bits of debris, no doubt, the tugs we saw on TV will pick them up and put them in a safe location. Of course, the very large ones would be a tremendous hazard to shipping and also a hazard to people if they started washing onto beaches. So I imagine they'll be picking up the big bits and pieces, but a lot of the smaller debris, some of it will obviously end up on the Gold Coast. We'll get out through the Nerang entrance there. But really it depends on weather conditions. If it gets out into the ocean and not into the waves, then the waves will, of course, wash it back on shore.
We have a tendency, of course, being lay people, to look at a map and assume that things will go south on account of gravity.
Not so much gravity. If it gets out in the ocean, you have the East Australia current, which will take it south, but it's not gravity. It depends on the currents. In the bay, it's the tidal currents and river currents at the moment. Out in the ocean, it's going to be wave currents, tides, and of course further out the East Australia current, which of course the boats ride down to Hobart each year. So it depends just how far out to sea it gets as to where it eventually ends up.
Good on you, Professor. Grateful for your time this morning.
Okay, my pleasure.
Professor Andrew Short, Director of Coastal Studies Unit at the University of Sydney.